Hello, my Built for Thousand Nation. How's everyone doing today? Hopefully, everyone's having a great day. If not, I hope it gets better from here. We are back with a new MrBallen video. I am so sorry, I just got done eating supper and my belly is full. I just need a nap. Watch a MrBallen video and take a nappy. As long as he doesn't make me cry like a little bitch this time, man. That was awful. Oh, but we are back with a new MrBallen video. This one is titled, Even Skeptics Can Explain How These Missing People Vanished. Make sure that's all. Oh. Yeah. Now, as we do know, the title of this could change. He does do that sometimes. It happens. If it's changed by the time I, said everything on mine, I'll change the title of it with it. But if not, then this is what we got. All right. Let's get a few things out the way before we get into today's video. I'm loving all the love I'm getting on Discord. I'm not going to go into all the great details that I did last week. I don't think it's necessary to keep beating the dead horse. I will probably remind y'all, don't forget to go over and check out the Discord periodically, but no sense in beating a dead horse. Y'all know what to do. You know what I mean? But I am loving all the love that's happening over there. It's amazing. Got 2 videos up last week on it. There will be 2 more videos up this week on it. Oh, I'm excited. I'm tired too. But I know one of them is a life of luxury and the other is a top 5. Not a nukes top 5, just top 5. I think that's it. If you are having a problem getting onto the Discord, like if either of the links are broken or anything, please let me know down in the comments. Like I said, I am new to Discord. I did set them as infinite on the time and the uses of them and stuff, where they're linked to the YouTube. That way people can just go there and click on them. Now, if either the one in the description or the one on the YouTube homepage is messed up, please just let me know down in the comments. That way I can try to get it fixed. Other than that, yeah, we're good to go. Let's go ahead and get into the story. Go ahead, turn them less down low, put on something comfy, pick up with someone special. Let's get perplexed. Ooh, perplexed. Big word. Go, Bill. Woo!
Today's story is a special one because this story was the very first one told on one of my personal favorite YouTube channels. The channel is called Wartime Stories, and basically the content is the strange, dark, and mysterious meets the battlefield and beyond. The host of Wartime Stories is Luke Lamana, and he was a recon marine, so very high speed, and he's got a great radio voice. But most importantly, he ferrets out these totally insane stories from service members from their times all around the globe. Running into these unexplainable phenomenon and
I never heard of the channel before.
Witnessing and being a part of things that just didn't make any sense. I mean, the stories he finds are terrifying and so intriguing. But in addition to just wanting to plug this amazing YouTube channel, I actually have another reason why I'm talking about Wartime Stories, but you'll have to wait till later in this episode to find out why. But before we get into this wartime,
either you're going to be in it, you have been in it, you're going to be on it, or have been on it, or he's being inducted into your MrBallen world of empowerment. Man, I want MrBallen to take me under his wing, man. Hey, yep. Come on now, MrBallen.
Stories inspired story. If you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, the next time the like button has spent hours and hours carefully cleaning and detailing their vintage car, offer to do them a favor by parking their car in their garage. And when you get in there, carefully back it into the garage, but then instead of putting it in park, just go ahead and hit the gas and smash the car into their house. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications.
Hell yeah, we're back to being mean to the like button.
Weekly uploads.
Thank God we're not giving the damn like button a hug or anything like that, man. That one fucked me up. I think we all left that one crying. I was blubbering like a bitch. I ain't even gonna lie. Man, my street cred is so low right now, it's not even funny. It's way down here. Like, yeah, yeah, there, that's better. It's way down here. It used to be, here-ish. I've gotten a lot more emotional since I've had kids. Like things that I would just be like, over before. I'm just like, oh, no. But man, Mr. Ballen's really up the game on me crying.
Okay, let's get into today's story.
And yes, my allergies are acting up like a mofo. My eyes are watering, my nose is running.
On the morning of August 16th, 1942, a woman named Ida Ruby was riding her horse on a dirt path right near a beach just south of San Francisco, California.
1940.
Now, during the week, Ida was a telephone operator, but it was a Sunday, so she had time off. And the way she liked to spend her time off was by
I love seeing, let's say like 1940, this picture right here. I love seeing people recreate that picture now with how it looks now compared to how it looked like in 1940 compared to 2024. I love that. It's like, oh my God, that's so cool.
riding her horse along the coast.
I love it. I'm a weird person. I really am.
Coastline and, looking out at the beautiful water and taking in the nature and all these unbelievable cliffs that went down to the water. I mean, this was a beautiful area. And every time Ida would go out and do this little ride around, she would bring binoculars with her. And so anytime she saw something of interest, she would stop and, use her binoculars to see what it was, like animals or things out over the water. And on this particular Sunday, Ida turned a corner, and as soon as she did, something caught her attention off to her right, out over the water. And so she stopped her horse and she turned and she looked out, and the sea was very calm, and she could see way out just past the horizon was what looked like this black thing kind of hovering over the water.
UFO?
And instead of raising her binoculars right away, she just kind of
Aliens?
squinted and looked off in
ET?
the direction.
What is
and she
it?
quickly realized what it was. It was a
What?
blimp.
Oh.
Now, today, when we hear the word blimp, we very likely think of the
Goodyear.
Goodyear blimp that kind of sits
No, actually, whenever I hear blimp, I forget about the Goodyear blimp. I really do. I always think of like the Hindenburg and shit, like fire, death, destruction. Yep. Oh, and the Rocketeer. Anyone remember that old ass movie, The Rocketeer? That pops into my head anytime I hear blimp as well.
over sporting events, with the big Goodyear logo stamped on the side of it. It's basically a big balloon with a gondola that sits underneath it for the person who's driving it and passengers. And that's actually exactly what Ida was seeing, a big oversized balloon with a gondola underneath it. But this was not a Goodyear blimp, it was a military blimp. Because this was 1942, right in the middle of World War II. And 9 months earlier, the United States had joined World War II after the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. And ever since then, Japanese submarines had been lurking off the coast of California, kind of all across the West Coast, out in the Pacific Ocean, and occasionally they would send torpedoes out and bomb the US mainland. And so the United States responded to this by launching this fleet of blimps that basically were able to get really low to the water, that could move really slowly, and they would basically fly all along the Pacific coastline looking for Japanese submarines. They could literally go down, and from their gondola, they could look down and actually see submarines and mark them for bombing runs or, scare them off. And so Ida, like anybody else who was living on the west coast of the United States at the
That's
time,
cool as shit.
was aware that
I
there
didn't know
were
that.
blimps out over the ocean, but it was still a fairly uncommon sight. And so because of that, Ida was sort of intrigued, and so she raised her binoculars and she focused on this blimp, and she would see something that was so strange that even 80 years later, nobody can fully explain it. But to really understand why what she saw was so weird, we need to back up
was
about
it?
5 hours on the same day to about 6 a.m. at a military
Time
base
travel?
just north of where Ida was seeing this blimp. And so at 6 a.m. at this military base, that particular blimp that Ida would later see was at this military base on the ground, and some Navy pilots and mechanics were preparing the blimp for a routine mission out over the San Francisco Bay to look for Japanese submarines. The intended path this blimp was going to take on this day was it would leave the base, and the pilot would take it over the famous Golden Gate Bridge, and then it would travel 28 miles to the west to the Farallon Islands. And then from there, the pilot would go 20 miles to the north to a peninsula called Point Reyes. And then from there, the pilot would head south along the coastline all the way back to base. This whole mission profile was scheduled to take about 4 hours. The
Okay.
pilots for this mission were going
On
to
a
be a 27-year-old
3-hour
Navy lieutenant
tour.
named Ernest Cody and a 34
I don't know why Gilligan's Island popped up in my fucking head. It's only supposed to take 4 hours. And then automatically, Gilligan's 3-hour tour.
year-old officer named Charles Adams. And both of them were very experienced blimp pilots. They had done missions like this many times before. This was going to be a very routine mission for them. And then also, in addition to those two pilots, there would be a Navy mechanic who would join the two pilots in case there was any malfunctions with the blimp during the mission. And so everything was going to plan with this blimp that morning. You know, there was nothing unusual about this mission. But right as the two pilots and the mechanic were literally getting inside of the gondola to begin this mission, Lieutenant Cody looked down at the control panel inside the blimp, and he noticed the blimp was way heavier than it should have been. Now, you have to understand that the level of rigor that went into preparing these blimps for flight was really intense. I mean, they were weighing every little thing that was put.
I mean, I imagine they would have to. Like, I'm not going to act like I know how blimps work. I'm not going to act like I know how a fucking balloon works, okay? Bees and helicopters still make my brain hurt, so I'm not going to act like I know how anything actually does this. But whenever they're filling it up with the gas, do they have something that continuously fills it? Or like, because I know how balloons are, like after time, balloons, you know, lose their oomph. Stuff starts leaking out of them. So I imagine, I don't know how they go about remedying that. Man, I don't know. So I would imagine things would have to, like, if you are too close to your weight and then like winds start pushing, that could probably mess with you. And wouldn't like heat and like temperatures, wouldn't that mess with it too? Because I mean, you know, you get something in a hot area, things move around, they can kind of pump it back up. You put it out in the cold, the molecules slow down, and you know it feels more flat. So does temperature mess with hot air balloons as well? I don't know, man. If you're a hot air balloon enthusiast or Hindenburg enthusiast, if you like blimps and you know things, let me know things. Damn, words got difficult. I think I had a stroke or something. I don't know, man. What the fuck is going on with me?
Inside of this blimp, because it was a really important part of flying these blimps, understanding how heavy it was. And so for this to be too heavy just made no sense. And so at first, Cody and Adams began like tapping on the control panel, thinking maybe the panel itself.
Can ice and stuff build up on them as well? Because I know planes, like, condensation can build up on them going through stuff. Can. I have so many questions. See, like hot air balloons and blimps, they amaze me, but they scare the shit out of me because I have this fear of heights. So I'd never get on one. Plus, I don't ever want to be exploded or fall. Like, people who get in hot air balloons, they're crazy. They're fucking crazy. I respect them. I respect them for being able to do that, but they're crazy. It's a wicker basket, bro. I have seen stuff fall through wicker baskets. I know.
Was malfunctioning, and if they hit it hard enough, the little ticker would go back to a normal weight. But despite, you know, hitting the panel, it still showed it was too heavy. And so they flagged over the mechanic who was going to be joining them on the flight anyways. And the mechanic looked and kind of thought for a second and then realized, you know, that day it had been very foggy. And so it was totally possible that all this extra moisture in the air had stuck to the surface of the balloon. And so collectively that had added quite a bit of weight. I mean, this is a massive balloon, a lot of surface area, a lot of water. Now, this was not some crisis. At worst, this was an inconvenience. Basically, they had to wait until this moisture kind of burned off once the sun came out, and then they could fly the blimp. But Cody and Adams, they just didn't feel like waiting. This mission was so routine, so simple, they'd done it so many times. And so Lieutenant Cody and Officer Adams decided that the easiest and fastest solution to this problem was simply to tell the mechanic who was going to come with them on this mission to not come with them. Without his weight inside of the gondola, even with this extra moisture in the blimp, it wouldn't matter. The blimp would still be light enough to fly with just the 2 pilots on board. The mechanic didn't care, so he hopped off, and then Lieutenant Cody and Officer Adams took their seats inside the gondola, and sure enough, when they looked at the control panel, the blimp was ready to go. It was light enough. And so Lieutenant Cody fired up the blimp's engines, and just after 6 a.m. that morning, Lieutenant Cody and Officer Adams lifted off the ground and began their routine mission. About an hour and a half later, at 7:38 a.m., Lieutenant Cody radioed back to air control, saying that so far the patrol had been totally routine, everything was going smoothly, they hadn't seen any Japanese submarines or anything out of the ordinary, and also Lieutenant Cody said they were positioned just east of the Farallon Islands, which meant they were exactly on course, and really everything did seem to be going exactly to plan. But 4 minutes later, Lieutenant Cody radioed back again to air control, and he said they had just spotted an oil slick down on the water. So basically, picture from their perspective, they saw that gleaming oil sitting on top of the ocean. And so at the time, this often signaled that below the surface of the water, under this oil slick, was a submarine. So this is like a telltale sign that the Japanese could be right here. So Lieutenant Cody and Officer Adams told air control that they were going to descend in the blimp down to the water and fully investigate this oil slick, and then they'd report back. This last transmission happened at 7:50 a.m. A few minutes later, a fishing boat named the Daisy Gray was gliding slowly through the water just east of the Farallon Islands, when all of a sudden the captain, who's looking straight ahead, he turned the boat and he happened to see straight ahead of him this massive blimp, the same blimp Lieutenant Cody and Officer Adams were in, descending very quickly through the clouds down towards the water. And remember, this was a pretty cloudy day, and so really this blimp kind of came out of nowhere, and this fishing boat captain was very aware that anytime blimps were out over the water, that was because they were looking for enemy submarines. And this captain realized he was heading right now straight in the direction of wherever this blimp was descending towards.
I would have pooped.
And so the captain looked out ahead, and
could you imagine being like just a regular fisherman out there, just are we getting anything, boys? Yeah. It'd be like some kind of weird ass cartoon, but you'd shit yourself in the process. Like the sub comes out from underneath of you and just starts like everyone starts coming out shooting at this freaking blimp, and you're just sitting there going, I just want a fucking fish fillet, man. I just want a fish fillet, bruh. Yeah.
He saw that big oil slick on top of the water, maybe 100 yards away from him, and so he put it together that, oh my gosh, this blimp is going to that slick. That means there's an enemy submarine basically right there. And so in a panic, the fishing boat captain called to his crew to pull in the fishing nets, and he turned the wheel as fast as he could, and he hit the accelerator, doing everything he could to get away from this blimp. Because he knew that typically what happened when a blimp came down and actually found a submarine is they sometimes dropped bombs on the submarine. I mean, this is warfare. And so the fishing boat captain is getting away as fast as he can, and as soon as he's turned around, he looked back and he saw the blimp was now about 30 feet over the water, and someone inside the gondola was now leaning out over the side, and they dropped 2 things directly into the water, into that oil slick. And then seconds later, these huge plumes of smoke were coming out of the water. The person had just dropped some flares, basically marking where this submarine was. And so now the captain knew, okay, it's a submarine, and the next thing is very likely going to be a bomb, like a depth charge is going to be dropped right there. And so again, the captain's just speeding his way as fast as he can, hoping that if they do drop a bomb, it doesn't affect him and his crew. And so after making it another couple hundred feet away from the blimp,
right now.
The captain again turned around, expecting to see this blimp still hovering where it was, because again, they had just dropped flares. They're preparing to do something major right there. But now, when the captain turned around, he saw the blimp was no longer hanging out over the water. The blimp was now rocketing back up into the clouds, like as fast as it possibly could. And before long, the blimp was gone. It disappeared into the clouds. And there had been no bomb dropped. I mean, nothing really happened beyond marking the water. So it was like, what's going on with this blimp?
What is going on with the blimp? I'm confused. Commercial.
Some of you might know that before I became a professional, strange, dark, and mysterious storyteller, I was in the military. And while I was in the military, I definitely had some pretty wild experiences all around the world. But to be honest, what I remember most about my time in service was not any of my own exploits, but rather it was the insane stories I heard from other service members. Keep in mind, military service members are sent to some of the most isolated, desolate, inhospitable places in the world, and many times in those places, weird things happen. Unexplainable things, like borderline paranormal things happen in these places. Think being out in the middle of the ocean with absolutely nothing around and seeing lights popping up in the sky and coming out of the ocean and seeing figures up on the mountains wandering around where there shouldn't be any people.
Like some Hellboy shit.
There are insane stories out there from service members, but many of them are not necessarily told in the public. They're kind of kept within the military. It's like kind of part of military lore. And the Wartime Stories YouTube channel that I mentioned at the top of this episode, well, Luke Lamanna, the military veteran, he goes out and finds these totally bizarre stories from service members from all over the world, and he tells those stories on his YouTube channel. That is the premise of Wartime Stories. And if that piques your interest, well, you're in luck, because not only can you right now go check out the Wartime Stories YouTube channel, but also, I personally hand-selected Wartime Stories to come under the Ballen Studios umbrella, and we have collaborated to make a brand new weekly podcast, the official Wartime Stories podcast, which is available right now. So, at the end of today's video, I'm going to play the trailer for the Wartime Stories podcast right at the end of this YouTube video. And then after you listen to that, go look up the Wartime Stories podcast on any podcast platform. It's free. All you have to do is look up Ballen Studios and you'll find Wartime Stories that way, or you can direct search for Wartime Stories. Click on it, follow them, and give them a listen. It's an amazing weekly show with new episodes coming out every single Monday. It's going to be awesome. Make sure you stick around till the end of this episode to hear that trailer. Okay, back to the story.
We all will, won't we?
Meanwhile, back at Air Control, the last thing they heard from Lieutenant Cody was, hey, we see this oil slick down below, we're going to investigate, and we'll radio back when we're done. And so Lieutenant Cody and Officer Adams, they had clearly descended down to the water because that fishing boat saw it happen, but then after they rocketed back up to the clouds for some reason, they never radioed back to Air Control. And so Air Control is waiting and waiting, they're not hearing back from Lieutenant Cody or Officer Adams. And finally, they began hailing the two pilots to say, hey, what's going on? You said you were going to investigate. What'd you find? What happened? But they could not get in touch with Lieutenant Cody or Officer Adams. And so eventually, after enough time had passed and they still had not heard from these pilots, Air Control sent two seaplanes out to that area east of the Farallon Islands to find the blimp and make sure the blimp was okay. But when the seaplanes got out there, they couldn't find the blimp anywhere. I mean, they flew all over the place doing wider and wider circuits. There was no sign of the blimp.
Up into space.
And when they looked down at the water in the same area where Lieutenant Cody had called out that slick and where that fishing boat had also seen the slick, well, the slick was gone, or the seaplanes just couldn't see the oil slick. But the seaplanes stayed on station in that area near the Farallon Islands for another 2 hours, just flying all over the place, kind of hoping to eventually see this blimp. And eventually they would. At about 10:30 a.m. that morning, one of the seaplanes spotted the blimp way, way high in the sky, like way higher than any blimp would ever go. It is dangerously high, and it was way off course. But when these two seaplane pilots began flying towards the blimp to get eyes on the pilots inside of this blimp, Lieutenant Cody and Officer Adams, well, when they got close enough, the blimp just began rapidly descending, like it was trying to avoid being seen by these seaplanes. And in fact, the blimp descended so quickly that it dropped below the cloud cover, and the seaplanes, they couldn't move that quickly. They had to do a big track to turn back around and try to go lower again. But once they got below the clouds to find this blimp, the blimp was gone. It basically had vanished. And so the seaplane pilots called back to Air Control, and they're like, I don't know what's going on with this blimp, but it's way off course. It was way up in the sky. Now it's somewhere down below, but we can't find it. We got to get in touch with Lieutenant Cody and Officer Adams. There's obviously something wrong. But Air Control would try over and over again to get in touch with these pilots, but neither Cody nor Adams
Was it because it was too light?
responded. They had just gone totally radio silent. And at the same time, this...
Bet they wish they had that. Bet they wish they had the mechanic now.
chaos with this blimp is happening. Ida Ruby, the woman at the beginning of the story, was riding her horse on that dirt path near the beach just south of San Francisco, and she looked out over the water and she saw that blimp. And so Ida Ruby, she stops, she raises her binoculars, and she looks at this blimp. And after she focuses her binoculars, she realizes there's obviously something wrong with this blimp. The actual balloon portion of the blimp, which said Navy on it, had collapsed so much in the middle that you couldn't even read the word Navy. It was all crumpled together because, again, the balloon is like deflated. And also she saw that this blimp appeared to just be kind of listing as if the wind was blowing it and it was not being directed by the pilots inside. And this blimp appeared to be getting blown directly towards Ida. And so she lowered her binoculars and she looked out with her naked eye, and sure enough, this crumpled up blimp that was still afloat but clearly was not doing too well was getting closer and closer and closer to her. And as it was getting lower and lower to the ground, and she's starting to worry it's going to smash into her. But right as this blimp was about to pass basically right over her head, she raised her binoculars one more time and she got a clear look inside of the gondola where Lieutenant Cody and Officer Adams would have been. Now, Ida Ruby has no idea who's supposed to be inside of this blimp and who isn't, or even what they're doing, but she definitely recalled exactly what she saw inside of that gondola, and that's the thing that has troubled everybody for so many years. Because what she saw was 3 people inside of that gondola. And if you recall, that gondola only ever contained 2 people. It was Lieutenant Cody and Officer Adams. But now, Ida Ruby is looking up, and clear as day, there are 3 people in that gondola. Even though at no point was there 3 people. It didn't leave with 3. It didn't come down and take more people on board. It made no sense that there were 3 people inside of that gondola. Again, Ida Ruby wouldn't have known that, but when that information got passed, this was like, how could that be? And so after seeing the 3 men inside of this blimp, Ida lowered her binoculars and watched in horror as this deflated blimp drifted just above her, you know, like practically arm's length above her, and careened over the cliffs behind her and smashed into the ground. And then seconds later, Ida began hearing sirens going off in Daly City, which was located right behind her. That was the nearest town. And so as the blimp came in for a crash landing in Daly City, it scraped across a couple of residential rooftops and hit a couple power lines before kind of coming to a stop in the middle of the street. Now, the blimp didn't like explode or catch on fire or anything. It just kind of crumpled to the ground. And
I'm very sorry for burping in y'all's ear. I like I said, I just had supper. I had homemade tacos, meatless tacos, but they was really good, bruh.
Nobody got out of it. It just kind of stopped, and it was there, right in the middle of the street. And very quickly, first responders rushed to this blimp because there have been so many reports of this deflated blimp looking like it was about to crash. And so they had been tracking it, and here it was. And so they ran up to this blimp. But at some point, one of the first responders ran up to the gondola itself where the door was slightly open, and they opened it up, hoping to find there would be some survivors inside. But when he looked inside of this relatively small space, there was nobody in there. And there was no sign that anybody had been in there. There was no blood or anything. It was just an empty gondola. But remember, minutes before, not even, Ida Ruby had clearly seen 3 people inside of that gondola.
If it was going as slow as the lady said it was, like the wind was what was carrying it, and it was coming down as low to the ground as what it was, they very well could have just jumped out. Threw a rope out, jumped out, you know, whatever. Like if it was hitting the roofs of houses, you're going over some trees, it's like we can make that jump. You're only a couple feet from trees, climb down a tree, and then boom, you're gone. You disappeared. So here's my thing, like, did a spy sneak on there somehow without anyone noticing somehow? Because it's weird. Like, here's my thing. It's a little weird that they just didn't want to just wait a little bit. And then the other people that was supposed to go, they was just like, no, just don't go. We got this. That way we're lighter. Like it's all sounding very, you know what I mean? A little You know what I mean? So who's to say, like after the mechanic left, that they didn't sneak someone on, or someone had snuck on and was making them do this, and then made them jump out, and he jumped out and took him captive? Or who's to say that they wasn't all in on it together? I don't know. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying, look, I have a beautiful mind, okay? Smooth and shiny. But who's to say that, like, isn't there pictures of like the Hindenburg with like people like being pushed out the windows and stuff before it exploded? Like they can go high, but they can also go really low, right? Yeah, who's to say that they just didn't jump out?
So to go from 3 people to none in the space of like, a couple 100 feet as everybody's watching this thing come into crash land in Daly City, like where could they have gone? And even weirder was when they looked inside of the gondola, they discovered that basically everything was functioning perfectly fine. It was unclear how it became deflated because, again, all the controls inside of this thing were working just fine. And also, like, the parachutes were still inside of this gondola. Like, if you're going to jump out, you need a parachute, but they were in here. And
Not if
also
you're
the
that
life
low.
raft. It was still inside of the gondola. It was like there was nothing wrong with the blimp. And so this whole situation made no sense. The Navy would launch an exhaustive investigation into what.
What is it? It's called scuttling when you do it to a ship, right? I don't know what it's called when you intentionally like wreck a hot air balloon or a plane. But who's to say that oh my God, what is wrong with my freaking mouth today? Are you going to work? Are you going to work? Okay. Who's to say? Remember, beautiful mind, really smooth, really shiny. Who's to say that maybe, it wasn't like a spy situation? And they sent the mechanic and the other person. There were supposed to be two other people, right? Or just one. I have a bad memory. But who's to say they didn't get rid of them? It was like, man, you know what? If you just don't go, we'll be light enough either way, and then the water can burn off. Everything looks fine. Everything looks good. And the dude's like, okay. It even says they left, and then a little bit later on, they could go because it was light enough. So who's to say that they didn't sneak someone on, or someone just didn't sneak on? But I mean, if there's no sign of struggle and blood and everything else, I would imagine that like he tried to overthrow it or nothing. And so that is what to me is telling me that, they snuck him on. So if they snuck him on, maybe they was doing something and they seen something or found something or whatever the case may be. Maybe the oil slick was something completely different. Maybe they radioed that the sub or whatever was like, hey, you might want to go. We got to mark you. Like, there's a boat out here and everything else. We can't just not do this. And then, in order to throw off what was going on, they just stopped communicating and just started acting a fool in it. And then they took a bunch of stuff that was in it out that, they could use, like papers and stuff for like codes and shit. And then as it's going over like some trees, because it's, over a little bit of a hill into the next town, right? So who's to say that that little bit of a hill wasn't high enough to where they could just jump out into the trees and just kind of thump, 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 thump. I mean, you wouldn't want to take the parachutes because then it's going to be like, oh, we got to look for them. There's missing people. If you don't want to be looked for, you don't give them a reason to look for you. That's my mind. I told you it's a beautiful, beautiful brain. It's smooth and shiny. You can see yourself in it.
happened with this blimp. And the only explanation the Navy came up with was, well, it looks like Officer Adams and Lieutenant Cody just fell out of the blimp at the exact same time and they disappeared into the ocean. However, both pilots were wearing life preservers and would not have taken those off. That was like absolutely 101 for being a pilot of one of these blimps. And so they would have had these life preservers on, and even if they had fallen out and perished, they would have floated to the surface, or if they landed on land, they would have likely been found. I mean, the entire route they had been on was heavily scrutinized and searched, but the bodies were never found. And then also, the Navy could not explain how Ida Ruby clearly saw 3 people absolutely, like 100 feet away from her, inside of that gondola. Like, she had no reason to lie about that. She was just saying, yeah, I looked up, saw 3 people, saw it crash into Daly City. She didn't know there was supposed to be 2 people. Like, she was just calling what she saw. But the Navy had no explanation. And so in the years that have followed this empty blimp crash in Daly City, it's been dubbed the ghost blimp story, and loads of theories circulate about what could have happened here. Some people say that, the reason there was all that extra weight at the beginning of the mission profile at 6 a.m. was not because of moisture on the balloon, but because there had to have been maybe a stowaway somewhere in the blimp, and then after takeoff, they jumped down into the gondola, and maybe they were responsible for whatever happened to the pilots and why the blimp crashed. But it doesn't explain what happened to those 3 people. What happened to the stowaway? What happened to Lieutenant Cody and Officer Adams' body? We don't know. Other theories include that maybe Lieutenant Cody and Officer Adams were somehow captured by the Japanese, and some other people say, maybe Cody and Adams were abducted by aliens. But as far-fetched as these theories might seem, the truth is, we really have no idea what happened on that
Like
ghost
my
blimp.
theory better, bruh.
Okay, that's the end of
Sneak
today's
peek.
story. And now here is the official trailer for the Wartime Stories podcast. And after you listen to it, be sure to go find the Wartime Stories podcast on any podcast platform, give them a follow, and tune in every Monday for a brand new episode. Enjoy the trailer.
What kind of stories come to mind when you hear the term war? Stories of courage under fire, daring accounts of espionage, or despicable crimes against humanity. True, these are
Anytime I hear like something war stories, like for some reason I always picture like a Clint Eastwood figure holding a like half broken cigar and the helmet and everything just going. "Rrrr." That's what I think whenever I think of war stories. I picture like Clint Eastwood sitting there in full like army fatigue, just urging me. I love Clint Eastwood. He's a great motherfucker.
stories
I
which
love
no
it.
doubt permeate the forefront of our minds when it comes to war.
But if you ask me what I think like a cowboy, the disgruntled cowboy looks like, I'm going to say Clint Eastwood as well. Like he's just that guy. He could be anything. I love it.
In and amongst the many anecdotes and legends born out of military service, from the gruesome front lines in foreign lands to the peacetime garrison back on home soil, did you know that there were other kinds of stories? The kinds of stories that are whispered, ever so quietly, among the disciplined ranks of military personnel. Experiences that often go unreported because, well, who among their commanding officers would believe them? Stories of unexplained mysteries, of terrifying creatures that hide deep in unexplored regions, encounters with entities that were thought to exist only in legends, testimonies that indicate we are not alone in the universe, and supernatural encounters that make a man question the nature of life and death.
Who said that?
My name is Luke LaManna. I'm a Marine Corps reconnaissance veteran with a few strange experiences. And when I became a civilian again, I found myself going down the proverbial rabbit hole. I became obsessed with finding these kinds of stories and getting to the root of them. And now, I'm going to share them with you. From Ballen Studios, this is Wartime Stories, a new, immersive weekly podcast that is a mix of horror, mystery, and awe-inspiring tales, where the strange, dark, and mysterious meets the battlefield and beyond. Follow and listen to Wartime Stories now, wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes every Monday.
Oh yeah, bruh. I love it. All right, that was great. I love the little tip at the end too, man. That was fucking awesome. I still think that that's correct. Like the reason why that it was so overweight wasn't going to be the moisture. I mean, it very well could have been, but think about it. I mean, it went from 2 people to 3 people. They was overweight when the mechanic and stuff was in there. Then whenever the mechanic left, they was right where they need to be, which means somebody around his weight is going to be on there too. Like, and they was just like, we don't need you, just get off. Like, that's weird. I'm sorry, but you're going to want a mechanic. You never know what the hell's going to happen. I don't want to be out in the middle of the fucking ocean in a fucking blimp and not have someone out there that knows what the fuck they're doing. You're going to want a mechanic, bruh. I don't know. I just think it's all shady, man. That's my opinion. Opinions are like assholes. Everyone's got one. Everyone thinks their smells good, but the only one that smells good is mine. I don't care what you say. It smells like roses. Don't say dead roses either. All right. I really enjoyed today's story. I didn't cry. Yes. Street cred went up a little bit. All right. I really enjoyed today's video. If y'all enjoyed today's story as much as I did, please go down there, leave a thumbs up. It really does help the channel grow. While you're down there, if you want to, go on over and slap that subscribe button, become part of the Bill 5000 Nation. And if you really like being part of the Bill 5000 Nation that much, go over and check out the B5 Nation Discord. That's right. Link is in the description and on the YouTube homepage. And if you'd like me that much, go ahead and ding that bell. It might work for you. It might not. It probably won't. It usually don't. But if it do, jump in on one of my premieres and be like, hey, Bill, you're everywhere, and I'm loving it. I just wish Discord dinged me like YouTube did. It's just not the same. I'll be like, hell yeah. Leave a like and dip. That's all you got to do. As always, be good to one another. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Man, MrBallen, if they'd been wearing some Bill 5000 merch, they would have never been able to hide. People would see them from a mile away because it's that beautiful.
You're